ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian and, as you could see, also Russian and China talk show. My name is Sasha Star, and today's guests are Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan. Great to have
Thank you,
you.
Sasha. Glad to be here.
And our own Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hi, Sasha. Hello,
Good to see
Jonathan.
you.
Nice to be here as well.
And we could start with your video.
Yeah, we can go with it.
Excellent.
Це що ви розуміли, коли у нас обстріл, стрічки збігаються.
Это у нас 25 число. Так, шахеды, ракеты.
Yeah, it's a horrible things to see, especially when it comes to my hometown of Odessa, and even Germans were very careful when it comes to Odessa. They never try to destroy the infrastructure of the city, and by April 10th, 1944, where Odessa was liberated, the city was intact, and actually it's very quickly came back to the normal life. Um, Russians are doing everything in their power to make life of Ukrainians miserable. It's just continuation of their policy of genocide against Ukrainian people, and I think there will be a heavy price for Russia to pay at the end of the day. It's not going to go just unpunished at all. And with all the very, very intricate policy of engagement between Ukraine and the United States, as we know what's happened lately, mm, I think that things will prevail and will go our way at the end of the day. Jonathan, what would you like to comment on that
Well,
I wanted to mention special letter that was sent to Ukrainian government with all the recommendations how to escape corruption and so on. It's not directly linked to the help provided by United States, whether it's a military help, financial help, or so on. It's not directly attached, but it seems to me that some movement in the right direction is expected now from Ukrainian government, Ukrainian people.
well, the interesting thing, those scenes of Ukrainians and dogs and so on taking shelter remind me of the scenes during World War II when the Germans were bombing London, and Londoners were forced to take refuge in subways and basements, and it's very reminiscent of those scenes, and it was being done by the Nazis for the same reason that the Russians are doing it to the Ukrainians, to terrorize the population. And it proved unsuccessful then. All it did back in World War II was stiffen the resolve of the British people to resist. And it has done pretty much the same thing in stiffening the Ukrainian resolve to resist. And it has not affected the efficiency of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which, as we are noting, is not only inflicting a superior attrition rate on the Russian army in terms of its artillery systems, which has been noted, and just in sheer numbers of casualties, but it is steadily degrading the Russian ability to resist the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And they are just, again, just I use the analogy of a skillful boxer. The Ukrainian military is keeping up the pressure to prevent the Russian army from effectively reinforcing by pulling troops from from other portions of the front. And the moment is steadily approaching where the Ukrainian counteroffensive will widen its tactical breakthrough into a full operational breakthrough, and then we will be able to see the end of the beginning, as Churchill might have put it.
Excellent.
I just wanted to add to Jonathan that unfortunately, and Jonathan is right, Russia, they can't prove anything on the battlefield, and they can't stop the advance of Ukrainian counter-offense, but they need to show some victories for their internal audience, because when Ukraine hits the HQ of the Black Sea Fleet, when Ukraine hits their air bases, their ammunition warehouses, their oil stations, they have to show something to the Russian population that they can hit something also as well. But unfortunately, they are not able to hit the Ukrainian military HQ because we have a war here, and our generals are not sitting in their regular place. These HQs are distributed somewhere. They're obviously
They're
bunkers.
They're very well decentralized and hidden.
Yeah, but they just hit the civilians' infrastructure. The last attack, they've destroyed a hotel on the bank of Black Sea in Odessa. It was really nice. Kempinski Hotel in the seaport, and they just destroyed it, burned, and they just they just said on their propaganda that there was a HQ of Ukrainian military command here, or some kind of some Ukrainian Nazis were stationed there, so they destroyed it. Everything was destroyed. No civil population, etc. So they just they can strike any place in Ukraine in order to have some kind of picture, and then tell to their population using the propaganda mechanism that they've destroyed everything. They've already destroyed all the Abrams tanks which were sent to Ukraine. They've already destroyed all the Bradleys, all F-16s already were destroyed, and they put down all.
It makes you wonder. It makes you wonder what alternate universe they are living in.
Yeah, they creating it every day, and their population, unfortunately, not all the population probably, but a huge amount believes it.
Yeah, they have to believe that's their own way to justify their miserable existence, at least that the Russian army is crushing everybody and so on. By the way, I wanted to add to what you're saying, that in this hotel, there were not only Ukrainian top commanders, but there were also Western advisors hiding there and advising the Ukrainian generals as well.
NATO troops already, which are fighting in Ukraine, because they're. I've seen recent interrogations with the captive Russian soldiers, and former mayor of one of the Russian cities was captured, and he was one who joined the Russian army on a volunteer basis in order to fight NATO troops. He honestly believes that in Ukraine are NATO troops, and they're fighting NATO troops, and that's why Russian army can't advance, because against them is fighting all armies of all NATO members, not only the American ones. And this is
Oh, I remember one propaganda show, I think by Solovyov or somebody from Russia, and they were saying that, okay, I was on front lines and there were Ukrainian army was advancing, but when I started to listen, there was no Ukrainian spoken, no Russian either. It was Polish, it was English, it was French and German. These were people, how they were communicating among themselves. So we are indeed fighting NATO armies. There are no Ukrainian army or anybody else. It's all NATO. And this was the Russian people listening to, and some of them believe so. It's
and this is for some of them. This is a motivation to join the Russian army and go fight. So their propaganda. I think that Joseph Goebbels was the head of Nazi's propaganda. Would be definitely proud of Russian propagandists. They overwhelmed him, I think, because they just zombified huge population, and they're fooling not only their population. Unfortunately, they're fooling the audience in Western countries, in Asia, in Middle East. They're using their propaganda, they're using money to bribe the local journalists, the local politicians, and this is just.
Ivan, further, I would like to add about Joseph Goebbels. If he would, for some miracle, would appear to be in Russia and he would be looking for a job in public relations and propaganda,
He'd find one.
Job. Nobody would hire him. Because
I think his skills will be not enough for them.
Yeah, no, he was not skillful enough. He's not talented enough. But Russian,
in this way, the Ukraine, as I said, the Ukrainian army is steadily forcing reality upon the Russian army and by extension, the Russian political leadership. As much deception as the Russians are conducting, or no matter how much propaganda they conduct, eventually the events on the battlefield will reach a point where the truth cannot be denied, hidden, or explained away, and then Russia will be faced with staring defeat in the face. Do they go nuclear? No. They cut their losses and get the heck out.
Yeah. It's also interesting that lately I've read a lot of information about how Russia treats its own soldiers. For example, one was hit by shrapnel in both his legs. And so Russians figured out in southern Ukraine. So they figured out that it's too expensive to send him back to Russia and treat him and then bring him back to front lines. So instead, they took him to some so-called medical point, you want to say it. So they looked at him and said, you're not so bad, you're okay. And very next day, without treating him at all, they sent him back on the front lines. And that was revealed by his mother, who came from Russia to the front lines trying to help him. This is how Russia treats him there. It's almost like when people are talking about the meat for the battlefield, they treat their soldiers as a meat, nothing else. Okay, you can fight, go fight. Oh, you're dead now. Okay, next one. They're just destroying their people one by one. It's horrible. It's no army in the world. I don't remember that any army would fight like that, because even I remember, for example, when the U.S. Army is preparing the attack, the number one thing what they do, they put hospitals to treat their wounded soldiers.
The U.S. Army has progressed remarkably in because the lessons of their wars have taught them the necessity of being able to medically to remove their wounded from the battlefield, treat them promptly, and basically a lot of soldiers that otherwise would have perished from their wounds on the battlefield are rescued, treated, and eventually are made whole. So they have, the U.S. Army has that much in its favor, and they're trying, and with any kind of decent luck, the Ukrainian armed forces will steadily attain nearly as much of a capability of doing that for their soldiers.
And America also has its possession giant the hospitals, like giant ships, which are equipped as hospitals, so they can get into any place in the world to help their wounded and treat them very quickly, right there, without sending them back to the United States. They can treat them right there on their ships. And but that's completely different philosophy. It's preserving their human capital, which is completely escaped Russia for the last 1,000 years. Even if you take Second World War, no, they don't even now. They still don't know how many people they lost in Second World War. They just don't.
Well, let's see. Joseph Stalin typified that attitude in his famous quote, "One death is a tragedy. A million deaths is only a statistic."
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Russians are now in statistics territory, but they don't know their statistics. They don't reveal, if they know even, they wouldn't reveal that statistics. And from what I see in Ukrainian Pravda source, it's getting closer and closer to 300,000 Russians being killed there. It's quite a number. If you consider that in 10 years in Afghanistan, they lost 15,000 people. And here, in a year and a half, they lost 300,000, almost there. It's enormous.
And the after effects, as I've said before, the after effects of that are going to be reflected in their subsequent population growth and demographic statistics. It's going to be a magnified problem for Russia to maintain an adequate birth rate, even to sustain their own population.
Absolutely.
Yes. Actually, as for the Afghanistan war, those 15,000 of Soviet army losses, they were official data. So knowing how the official Russian official data is lying, they're saying that they've lost a couple of thousand of soldiers in Ukraine. We can just imagine the real number of their losses in Afghanistan, because this war was one of the reasons why Soviet Union braked, actually, because this war created so strong pressure on their budget and on the people's opinion, especially on mothers of those mobilized soldiers, that they've just had to end this war, but it was too late, and Soviet Union collapsed in the end. They just were not able to afford such war for themselves. Actually, not the Afghan war was the major reason of Soviet Union collapse, but it was one of the reasons why Soviet Union collapsed. And I'm pretty sure that this invasion to Ukraine, Russian invasion to Ukraine, will be also one of the reasons why Russia will collapse in the end, and why they will lose even more territories than they've wanted to conquer when they've started this war.
Actually, there's a very interesting phenomena of when you remind me about Afghanistan war and the end of that war. In the 90s, I visited Moscow a few times, and there were a lot of veterans from Afghan war. they were despised by the population. They were treated miserably. They were told, nobody sent you to fight there. Oh, you went to fight there and now you lost, you're losers. And many of them were maimed. Many of them had no legs or arms or something like this. A lot of these people, they became bandits because they couldn't enter any normal profession or so on, but they had fighting experience. So they become bandits, and they were robbing banks and companies and people on the streets and so on. It was Moscow at that time, I'm talking about early 90s, was very, very dangerous place with a lot of crimes on the street and so on. And it wasn't a crime that many people say, oh, Putin, he has a great order and there are no crimes or so on. This baloney. The crime was a very natural continuation of Afghan's war. But now, can you imagine at the end of this war, one day it will end, and many, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, armed people, will enter Russia, their own troops, and people will despise them just as well and say, oh, you're losers. Oh, you went to fight in Ukraine, and what happened? Oh, you lost. Go to hell. And they will not be able to peacefully work somewhere and contribute to society. Not at all.
I have only one word to describe what will be the situation that exists in Russia then. It will be anarchy. Total, complete anarchy.
Yeah, it goes.
Yeah, and they will have to exchange their nuclear arms for food regularly, probably because they will have the same crisis what they had in the end of the 80s years and the beginning of the 90s when Soviet Union collapsed. But the problem is that in Soviet Union, the majority of population lived in poverty. Actually, they were not used to a lot of great inventions like washing machines, or like they didn't have any cars. They had a deficit on everything and used some kind of paper cards to buy some elements of luxury, like some cups or some kind of sofas or wardrobes. They were not available in Soviet Union. And in Russia, actually, population used to, at least in the biggest Russian cities, they've used to have a more successful and rich life. They have modern cars. They traveled around the world and they're get to these goods of civilization. And when Russia will collapse, then probably the situation will be more shocking.
It's already changing.
For
There's
them.
no more trouble.
Yeah, by the way, I found a really nice video about the Afghan war, which we've mentioned before. It explains the Russian-Afghan war in 2 minutes. I think it's it will be really nice to watch it because the history repeats, and we have probably the same situation with their invasion to Ukraine. So, Mark, please launch this video.
Excellent.
That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day.
Well, guess what? The war started in December 25th, 1979. And by December 25th, 1991, Soviet Union was no more. Like Putin was asked what's happened to the submarine Kursk, and he said it's drowned. Same thing was happened to Soviet Union. Well, it just
Yeah,
became dead.
in Afghanistan, they were fighting not the regular army. Actually, they were fighting some guerrilla troops, some rebels, which were armed with stingers. There were no javelins at that time, but I think that they had some kind of any other tools, and of course, they were supported by the United States. And that was the scenario. Actually, United States was prepared for when Russia invaded Ukraine. They thought that Ukrainian army will be defeated and that Ukrainian people will be united and will be fighting Russians like guerrillas, troops like rebels, and they will be supported by some kind of javelins, by stingers, and all the south, not heavy armament, but that all Ukrainian army will be either destroyed in the days, in several days, or they will flew away. But this scenario was not going like it was planned. Ukrainian army survived. They've kicked back Russians without any major Western support. Of course, we were thankful for some javelins, but it was Ukrainian artillery and the Ukrainian tanks and Ukrainian troops armed by old Soviet weapon, which kicked off Russians from the Kiev region, from the north of Ukraine. So Russians understood that they were, and it were actually Ukrainian fighter jets, and Ukrainian anti-aircraft systems, which destroyed so great number of Russian aircrafts and killed so much Russian pilots that they were afraid of flying deep into Ukrainian territory, and without the support of the aviation, obviously, and with such heavy losses, Russian troops had to flee from the north of Ukraine. And only after that, I'm just trying to recall the situation which was more than a year ago. Only after that, Western countries started to supply more heavy weapons to Ukraine, starting from the artillery systems, then HIMARS, then some armored vehicles, tanks, long-range missiles, and hopefully we will get F-16s, and this will allow us to liberate all Ukrainian territory, at least I hope.
Actually, I think, I'm sorry, that the deliberating destroyal of infrastructure in peaceful Ukrainian cities, Russia almost encouraging West to bring more and more heavy weapons. Jonathan, do you see?
They're inviting their own destruction, and what is happening is that the Ukrainians, as has been the case throughout this war, have exceeded the expectations of the West and their opponents at their ability to successfully integrate and make maximum use of whatever they get, and being able to improvise, to invent things on their own, and in order to consistently exceed and frustrate the expectations of their opponents, and perhaps the expectations of its own allies, because, hey, you're not supposed to be able to be doing this well.
Actually, it's a good case that the NATO and United States can learn something.
Yeah, you're defeating the Russians ahead of schedule. We weren't expecting you to defeat them until sometime in the middle of next year. Well, and the Ukraine says, and whose fault is that?
Yeah, and the great thing is that the Ukrainian population is also getting used to to the strikes, to the blackouts, and I think that for the upcoming season, Russia already started to strike on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. They've hit it several days ago. They had the major strikes, and unfortunately, not all their missiles were shot down. So they hit some of the energy infrastructure objects, but they were repaired just within 1 day. There were no major blackouts, but I know very few people who don't have some kind of power banks at their homes, who don't have some kind of autonomous internet systems. I myself, or those who are living in the private houses, they've already bought generators, electric generators. I've moved to the village nearby Kiev, and I also bought generator, made some autonomic internet connection, have a lot of power banks, water supplies, supplies of food, supplies of gas, and Ukrainians are ready for any strikes from Russia, which obviously will be in the upcoming season. But I think that by these strikes, Russia is doing worse to themselves, not for the Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, listen, have you heard the speech of King Charles, where he compared the present situation in Ukraine with that one in England in 1939? And he said that the same way as England was prepared to fight until the last drop of their blood against Germans, so today Ukraine does exactly the same thing. And that's unparalleled, very significant support that Ukraine has in international community, starting with England and many other countries, with even some disagreements over certain things like grain deal with Poland and other countries. But that's insignificant compared to the help that all these countries offer to Ukraine. With that, I would like to thank you very much for today's program, and I'm looking forward for Friday's program with even better news for us. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.